The night was cold in Seoul whence life changed forever. She stood at her checkpoint near the military base, watching cars pass by with tired eyes. She had been a sergeant in the Republic of Korea Army for 6 years. She was 28 years old. She was good at her job. She knew how to fight. She knew how to survive. But none of that mattered when the light came down from the sky. It happened so fast. One moment she was checking a driver's license. The next moment, a beam of white light hit her body and she felt herself lifting off the ground. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to move, but her muscles would not obey. The world spun around her, and then everything went black. When opened her eyes, she was lying on a cold metal floor. The air smelled wrong. It was too clean, too sharp, like chemicals mixed with something she could not name. She pushed herself up slowly and looked around. She was in a large room with gray walls and no windows. The ceiling glowed with a soft blue light, and she was not alone. There were others in the room with her, maybe 40 or 50 beings, but most of them were not human. She saw creatures with blue skin and long arms. She saw small beings covered in fur with large black eyes. She saw tall, thin figures that looked like they were made of crystal. And she saw a few humans too, all of them looking as confused and scared as she felt. A woman was crying in the corner. A man with gray skin and 4 eyes was praying in a language did not understand. Everyone was afraid. Everyone knew something terrible had happened to them. Stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to be still. She was a soldier. She had trained for difficult situations. She would not let fear control her. She looked at her body and saw that she was still wearing her military uniform. Her weapons were gone. Her radio was gone. Everything useful had been taken from her. The wall at the far end of the room suddenly became transparent, like glass. Behind it stood creatures that made its blood run cold. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, with thick bodies covered in scales that shimmered like oil on water. They had 4 arms each and faces that looked like a lizard mixed with something from a nightmare. Their eyes were yellow with black slits in the middle, and when they looked at the prisoners, those eyes showed no mercy. Only hunger. Only excitement. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was larger than the others and wore armor made of black metal decorated with red symbols. When it spoke, the words somehow translated in its head, though she did not know how. "Welcome to the Crimson Fang," the creature said. Its voice was deep and cold. "I am Lord of the Empire. You have been chosen for a great honor. You will participate in the hunt." The prisoners began to panic. Some screamed. Some tried to run, though there was nowhere to go. The crystal being next to made a sound like breaking glass, which she somehow understood was crying. Lord continued speaking as if he did not notice their fear, or perhaps he enjoyed it. "You will be taken to our hunting moon 4. There you will be released into the wild lands. You will be given 1 weapon each. The rules are simple. Survive for 10 cycles and you will earn your freedom. Die and you will provide us with sport." A smaller stepped forward with a tablet in its hands. "No prisoner has ever survived past cycle 3, it announced proudly. "The current record is 2 cycles and 14 hours, held by a warrior who killed 3 hunters before he was caught." The prisoners' fear grew stronger. Some fell to their knees. Some begged for mercy. The humans in the group looked at each other with horror in their eyes. One of them, a young man who looked barely 20 years old, was shaking so badly he could not stand. But did not beg, she did not shake. She stood straight and watched Lord with steady eyes. Something inside her was changing. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed down by something else. Something harder, something colder. Lord noticed her. He tilted his massive head and looked at her the way a cat looks at a mouse that has done something interesting. "A human," he said. "We captured several of your kind recently. Your species is new to us. We have heard you come from a death world, a planet filled with dangerous creatures. But you yourselves are soft, weak. No claws, no armor, short lives." He walked toward her, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. The other prisoners moved away, leaving standing alone before the monster. He was so much larger than her. His 4 arms could tear her apart without effort. His teeth were sharp enough to bite through bone. But did not step back. She looked up at him and said nothing. Lord laughed. It was an ugly sound. "This one has spirit. How amusing. I will enjoy watching you die, little human." The distribution of weapons began. Guards brought boxes into the room and started handing out items to the prisoners. Some received plasma rifles, weapons that glowed with energy. Others received stun batons or shock nets. The crystal being was given a force shield generator. The blue-skinned creatures received vibration blades that hummed with power. When it was turn, Lord himself walked over with her weapons. He held them up for everyone to see, and the other laughed. In one hand was a pistol, a simple projectile weapon, the kind humans had used for hundreds of years. In his other hand was a combat knife, maybe 8 inches long, with a plain metal blade. "The human gets the museum pieces," Lord announced. "Primitive tools for a primitive species. 30 small metal projectiles and a sharp stick. Let us see how long the soft-skinned creature lasts with these." He dropped the weapons at his feet. The other laughed harder. Even some of the prisoners looked at her with pity. Bent down and picked up the pistol. She checked the magazine. 30 rounds, just as he said. She tested the weight, the balance. It was a good weapon, well maintained. Then she picked up the knife. She turned it in her hand, tested the edge with her thumb. Sharp, very sharp. Lord watched her with amusement. "Do you know how to use those toys, little human?" Looked up at him, her face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, just calm, steady focus. "Yes," she said, "I do." Something flickered in Lord's yellow eyes. For just a moment his smile faltered. Then it returned, wider than before. "Good," he said. "That will make the hunt more entertaining." He turned and walked away, his guards following behind him. The wall became solid again, blocking the prisoners from the view. Around, the other prisoners were examining their weapons, talking in scared voices, some still crying. But just stood there, holding her pistol and her knife, thinking. They thought she was weak because she was human. They thought she was helpless because her weapons were simple. They did not know that humans had survived ice ages, wars, plagues, and disasters that had wiped out species far stronger than them. They did not know that humans had hunted creatures 10 times their size with nothing but sticks and stones. They did not know that the most dangerous thing about a human was not their body. It was their mind. Slid the knife into her belt and held the pistol at her side. She had 30 bullets and a blade, against an empire of monsters. It would have to be enough. The drop pods fell from the sky like metal rain. Felt her body slam against the seat as her pod hit the ground hard. The door blew open with a hiss of steam, and she rolled out onto dirt that was the color of rust. The air was thick and hot, and it burned slightly when she breathed it in. She was on 4 now, the hunting moon. Got to her feet quickly and looked around. The landscape was like nothing she had ever seen. The trees were tall with purple leaves and bark that looked like dried blood. The ground was covered in strange plants with thorns as long as her fingers. In the sky, 2 suns burned red, making everything look like it was covered in old rust. In the distance, she could see mountains with sharp peaks cutting into the orange clouds. All around her, other drop pods were landing. She could hear screams already. Some prisoners were running in panic, crashing through the forest without direction or plan. Others just sat on the ground, frozen with fear, waiting for death to find them. Did none of these things. She moved quickly into the cover of the trees and crouched low behind a thick trunk. She controlled her breathing. She watched. She listened. The sound of engines came from the east. Hover bikes, she guessed. The hunters were already coming. She saw them through the gaps in the purple leaves. 3 on machines that floated above the ground, moving fast through the forest. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons that glowed with deadly energy. They were laughing as they flew, calling out to each other in their harsh language. To them, this was fun. This was sport. Watched them pass. She memorized the sound of their engines, the pattern of their movement. They came from high ground. They made lots of noise. They did not bother to hide because they did not think they needed to. They were the hunters. They were not worried about being hunted. That was their first mistake. The screams started soon after. Heard plasma fire in the distance, followed by cries of pain that were quickly silenced. The hunters were killing prisoners already, barely an hour into the first cycle. She heard cheering through the forest as another life ended. She did not run toward the sounds. She did not run away either. Instead, she began to move carefully through the forest, studying everything. She learned which plants were safe to touch and which ones had thorns that dripped with something that smelled like poison. She found a stream of dark water and tested it carefully. It was not clean, but it would not kill her immediately. She found caves in the rocky hills. She found places where the ground was soft and could be dug. She found tall trees that could be climbed. She was not running, she was preparing. By nightfall, the twin suns had set and 3 pale moons had risen. The temperature dropped sharply. Had found a narrow ravine between 2 rock walls. It was hidden, defensible, and had only one way in. She sat with her back against the cold stone and waited. She heard the hoverbike engine around midnight. It was coming closer, moving slowly. A single hunter, she guessed, following some kind of tracking device. They must have put something on the prisoners, some way to find them. Looked down at her military uniform. She had not thought to check it. Quickly and quietly she stripped off her jacket and found it. A small metal device, no bigger than a button, sewn into the collar. A tracker. She held it in her hand and smiled. Her first real smile since waking up on that ship. The engine sound was very close now. She could see light from the hunter's vehicle reflecting off the ravine walls. He was coming directly toward her position. Placed the tracker on the ground in the middle of the ravine. Then she climbed the rock wall, finding handholds in the dark, moving as silently as a shadow. She reached a ledge about 15 feet up and pressed herself flat against the stone. The hunter appeared at the entrance of the ravine. He was young for a smaller than lord with scales that were more green than black. His name was, though did not know this and did not care. He dismounted from his hoverbike and walked forward on foot, his particle cannon raised. He wanted to savor this kill. He wanted to see the fear in his prey's eyes. He walked past her hiding spot without looking up. Why would he? Prey runs on the ground. Prey hides in holes. Prey does not climb above the hunter and wait. Dropped. She landed on his back and her weight drove him to his knees. Before he could react, before he could even understand what was happening, her knife was at his throat. One quick motion, deep and precise. The young hunter made a gurgling sound and fell forward. His body twitched once, twice, then was still. Green blood spread across the rust-colored dirt. Stood over him, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear but from something else, something she did not have time to examine. She worked quickly. She took his armor plates and strapped them to her body as best she could. They were too big, made for a creature twice her size, but they would stop some damage. She took his communication device and his ration pack. She could not use his particle cannon because it was coded to biology, but she took the power cells from it. Those might be useful later. Then she did one more thing. She dragged the body to the entrance of the ravine and propped it against a tree. She positioned it so that it was facing outward, toward where his companions would come from. She left his eyes open. A message. She disappeared into the darkness before the other hunters arrived. By morning, 2 more were dead. The first one had been tracking another group of prisoners when a bullet came out of nowhere and went through the gap in his helmet where his eyes could see. He was dead before he hit the ground and was already gone before his body cooled. The second one found what he thought was an empty cave and went inside to search. He fell into a pit that had spent 3 hours digging, lined with wooden stakes she had sharpened with her knife. His screams echoed through the forest until they stopped. Lord received the reports on his command ship above the moon. He read them 3 times because he did not believe them. 3 hunters dead. 3. And all of them killed by the same prisoner, the human female with the primitive weapons. "This is impossible," he said to his officers. "She is one small creature with a projectile weapon and a blade. How is she killing trained hunters?" None of his officers had an answer. Lord stared at the screen showing the hunting grounds. Somewhere down there in those purple forests, a human woman was doing what no prisoner had ever done before. She was not running. She was not hiding. She was fighting back. And she was winning. "Send more hunters," Lord ordered. "Double the patrols. I want her found and killed. I want her body brought to me." His officers hurried to obey. More hoverbikes launched from the ship. More hunters descended to the moon. The search intensified, but was already moving. She had taken supplies from her kills and traveled through the night to a new location. She had found a waterfall that would hide her heat signature. She had found a cave behind the falling water where she could rest and plan. She counted her bullets, 27 left. She had used 3 bullets, 3 kills. She could not afford to waste any more. But bullets were not her only weapon. The forest was full of materials, rocks that could be sharpened, vines that could be made into traps. The power cells she had taken could be turned into explosives if she was careful. Sat in her hidden cave and began to work. Her hands were still stained with green blood. Her body ached from climbing and running and fighting, but her mind was clear and cold and focused on one thing. Survival was not enough. She was going to make them pay. In the command ship, Lord watched the reports come in. 2 more hunters had gone silent. Their trackers showed they were not moving. When a search team reached their positions, they found only bodies. The hunt was only 2 cycles old. 6 were already dead. And the human woman was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for her next kill. By the 4th cycle, 11 hunters were dead. Word spread through the forest like fire. The surviving prisoners whispered to each other when they found hiding places close together. They shared the story in quick, frightened voices. There was a human woman out there. She was killing the hunters. She was fighting back and she was winning. Most of them did not believe it at first. How could one small being with primitive weapons kill the mighty? It had to be a lie. It had to be a trick by the hunters to give them false hope. But then they found the bodies, or what was left of them. Was a merchant from a world called Prime. He was tall and thin with gray skin and large dark eyes that could see well in low light. He had been taken by them because he owed money to the wrong people. He was not a fighter. He had never held a weapon before the guards handed him a stun baton and pushed him into a drop pod. For 4 cycles had done nothing but hide and run. He had watched other prisoners die. He had nearly died himself twice, escaping only because the hunters were distracted by easier prey. He was tired. He was hungry. He was ready to give up. Then he found her. He was crawling through a narrow canyon trying to find water when he smelled something burning. Smoke. Fire. On this moon, fire usually meant hunters, but something made him move closer instead of running away. He found a small camp hidden behind a wall of rocks. There was a fire, yes, but it was tiny and carefully contained. And sitting beside it was a creature unlike any he had ever seen. A human female, small by galactic standards. Soft skin without scales or fur or armor. 2 arms, 2 legs, a face that showed no fear at all. She was wearing pieces of armor strapped to her body. Her hands were covered in dried green blood. She was sharpening her knife on a stone, the metal making a soft scraping sound with each stroke. Stared at her. This was the one. This small, soft thing was the killer that had made the mighty afraid. "I know you are there," the human said without looking up. "You can come out. I will not hurt you unless you give me a reason." Stepped out from his hiding spot. His legs were shaking. He did not know if he was more afraid of her or of the hunters. I heard stories," he said. about a human killing hunters. The stories are true. How? The question burst out of him before he could stop it. How are you doing this? They are bigger, stronger, they have better weapons. How is it possible? The human finally looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and steady and very cold. They think this is a game, she said. They are wrong. This is a war. And humans have been fighting wars since before their species crawled out of their swamps. She stood up and walked toward him. Wanted to run, but his feet would not move. She stopped in front of him and studied his face for a long moment. How many of us are still alive? She asked. I do not know, maybe 10, maybe less. Can you find them? Blink to what? The other prisoners. Can you find them and bring them here? Why would you want that? More people means more noise, more chances to be found. The human smiled. It was not a warm smile. Because one person can kill hunters, but a group of people working together trained properly can do something more. We can break them. Her name was, learned this as he traveled through the forest over the next 2 cycles, searching for other survivors. He told them about her. Some did not believe him. Some were too afraid to move from their hiding places. But some came. One by one, they found their way to camp. There was a being made of living crystal whose body could see light that others could not. The hunter's equipment gave off heat and energy that could detect from far away. He was scared, and his crystal body was cracked in several places from close escapes, but he wanted to live. There were Lyra and Mora, twin sisters from a water world. They had gills as well as lungs and could survive underwater for hours. The hunters did not like to go in water. It slowed them down and damaged their equipment. The sisters had survived by hiding in the toxic swamps, barely breathing, waiting for the danger to pass. There was an elderly being with wrinkled purple skin and 6 small eyes. He was a philosopher, a scholar. He had studied the Empire for 50 years. He knew their culture. He knew their weaknesses. He knew their pride. And there were 2 others. A young human man named who had been taken from a fishing boat in the Pacific Ocean. He could not stop shaking and he cried every night, but he refused to die without fighting. And a tall being covered in brown fur named who never spoke but who followed orders without question. 7 survivors in total, 7 against an empire. This is foolish, said on the first night they were all together. We should hide, wait for the 10 cycles to end. That is how we survive. No one has ever survived 10 cycles, said quietly. His voice was soft and sad. The do not allow it. If a prisoner gets close to the end, they send more hunters. They change the rules. They make sure the game ends the way they want. Then what hope do we have? Stood up, the firelight made shadows dance across her face. On my world, she said, we have a saying. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down. They expect us to stick up, to run in obvious patterns, to hide in predictable places, to act like prey. She picked up her knife and held it so the blade caught the light. We will not be nails. We will be the hammer. Over the next 2 cycles, she trained them. Not to fight like soldiers. That was impossible. Most of them had never held a weapon before. They could not match thee in strength or speed or firepower. But they could think, they could plan, they could use what they had. Learn to be their eyes. He climbed to high places and watched for the energy signatures of approaching hunters. He could give them warning minutes before they arrived. Lyra and Mora learned to use the water as a weapon. They mapped every stream, every swamp, every underground river on their part of the moon. They found places where the ground looked solid but would collapse under the weight of a hoverbike. They found deep pools where a hunter could be dragged down and held until he stopped moving. Shared everything he knew about psychology, their pride, their arrogance, their need to feel superior. They do not believe they can lose, he explained. This is their greatest weakness. When things go wrong, they become confused, angry, they make mistakes. Learn to build things. His merchant skills included basic engineering. showed him how to turn the power cells from dead hunters' weapons into explosives. Not big ones, but enough to damage a hoverbike or break through armor. Even stopped crying after a while. He was still scared. They all were, but fear could be useful. Fear made you careful. Fear kept you alive. "Why are you doing this?" asked one night when the others were sleeping. "You could survive alone. You have proven that. Why risk yourself for us?" Was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "When I was young, my grandmother told me a story about a tiger that hunted a village. Every night it came and took someone. The villagers were afraid. They hid in their homes. They prayed for the tiger to go away, but it never did." What happened? One night the villagers stopped hiding. They came out together with torches and sticks and farm tools. They were not strong like the tiger. They were not fast, but there were many of them and they were not afraid anymore. They drove the tiger away and it never came back. She looked at with those cold, steady eyes. "They are the tiger. They have been hunting people across the galaxy for centuries because everyone is too afraid to fight back. Everyone hides. Everyone prays for it to end, but it never does." She turned back to watch the darkness beyond their camp. "I am going to show them that we are not prey, that we can fight, that we can win. Maybe we will all die here, but if even one story gets out, if even one person in the galaxy hears what we did, then maybe next time the tiger comes, they will not hide." Did not say anything. There was nothing to say. In the distance, they could hear the sound of hoverbike engines. The hunters were searching for them. They were getting closer every day. But for the first time since he was captured, was not afraid. He was ready to fight. Cycle 7 began with the confident of victory. Lord stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked down at the hunting moon with satisfaction. His scouts had finally found the prisoners. All 7 of them were hiding in the northern mountains. They were cornered, surrounded. There was nowhere left to run. 30 hunters remained on 4. It was more than enough. It was more than had ever been needed before. Lord had lost 11 of his best warriors to this human woman, but that ended today. He would go down to the surface himself. He would lead the final hunt. He would kill the human with his own hands and broadcast her death across the empire. This would be a lesson the galaxy would never forget. "Prepare my shuttle," Lord ordered, "and make sure the recording drones are ready. I want every moment captured, every scream, every death. The galaxy will watch and remember what happens to those who challenge the..." His officers hurried to obey. Within the hour, Lord was descending to the surface in his personal shuttle, surrounded by his elite guard. Behind him, 30 hunters on hoverbikes formed a line that stretched across the mountain passes. They moved forward like a wave of death, weapons ready, eyes hungry. In the mountains above them, watched through a scope she had taken from a dead hunter, she counted the bikes. She counted the warriors. She saw Lord's shuttle landing at the rear of the formation. "They are coming," reported from his position on a high cliff. His crystal body glowed faintly as he tracked the energy signatures below. 30 hunters, all armed with heavy weapons. They are entering the eastern pass. Nodded, everyone knows their positions. Around her, the other survivors looked back at her with fear and determination mixed together on their faces. They had prepared for this moment. They had trained for it. But training and reality were different things. "We know," said. His hands were shaking slightly as he held the detonator had given him. "May the stars protect us." "The stars will not protect us," said. "We will protect ourselves. Now go, and remember what I told you. We are not prey. We are the hunters now." They scattered to their positions. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. They entered the mountain pass in a tight formation. Their hoverbikes kicked up clouds of rust-colored dust. Their engines roared off the canyon walls. They were not trying to be quiet. They wanted their prey to hear them coming. They wanted them to feel terror in their final moments. The first explosion came without warning. The lead hoverbike simply disappeared in a ball of fire. The power cells that had buried in the narrow pass detonated with enough force to shake the mountains. The blast threw 3 more hunters from their bikes. The formation broke apart as drivers swerved to avoid the flames and falling rocks. Confusion, screaming. The hunters shouted to each other in their harsh language, trying to understand what had happened. Their equipment had not detected any traps. Their scanners had shown the pass was clear. But the scanners could not detect holes dug by hand and filled with power cells wrapped in cloth. They could not detect the thin wire that ran up the canyon wall to where was hiding with his detonator. Before the hunters could recover, the second phase began. Rocks began falling from the cliffs above. Not natural rocks. Rocks that had been carefully loosened over 2 days, held in place by wooden supports that was now cutting with a knife. The avalanche buried 4 more hunters and blocked the path forward. They dismounted from their bikes. They could not advance on vehicles now. The terrain was too dangerous. They would have to proceed on foot. That was exactly what wanted. "Spread out," one of the hunt leaders shouted. "Find the prisoners, kill them all." The hunters began climbing the canyon walls, using their 4 arms to move quickly over the rocks. They were faster than the prisoners, stronger. Their armor would protect them from most attacks. They were still confident, still certain of victory. Then they started dying. Called out positions from his hidden perch. His crystal eyes could see the hunters even through rock and smoke. He guided the others with quick, sharp instructions. 3 climbing the west wall, 2 near the waterfall, 1 alone on the ridge. The one on the ridge never saw Lyra coming. She rose out of a pool of water behind him, silent as a ghost, and pulled him backward into the dark water. He struggled, but his armor was heavy and his lungs were not made for holding breath. She held him under until he stopped moving. Mora was waiting in a different pool. Another hunter walked too close to the edge, searching for prey in the rocks above. He did not think to look down. Her hands shot out of the water and grabbed his ankle. He fell hard. She was on him before he could rise, her webbed fingers finding the gaps in his armor, her sharp nails opening wounds that would not close. On the west wall, a hunter climbed over a ledge and found himself face to face with. The old philosopher was holding a particle cannon. His 6 eyes were calm and sad. "I spent 50 years studying your kind," said. "I know exactly where to shoot." The blast took the hunter in the neck, one of the few places his armor did not protect. He fell backward off the cliff without making a sound. The hunters were dying, one by one picked off by creatures they considered beneath them. Their formation was broken. Their communication was chaos. Their confidence was turning to fear. And through it all, moved like a shadow. She had 4 bullets left. She had to make each one count. The first bullet killed a hunter who was about to shoot in the back. The second killed one who had cornered against a cliff wall. The third killed Lord's personal guard, a massive with black and gold armor who was leading a group towards position. 3 shots, 3 kills. She was down to her last bullet. She saved it. The battle raged for hours. The twin suns moved across the orange sky. The mountains ran green with blood. Hunters fell to traps, to ambushes, to enemies they never saw coming. They tried to retreat but found the path behind them blocked. They tried to call for help, but their communications were jammed by their own damaged equipment, sparking and burning in the wreckage of their hoverbikes. By the time the suns began to set, it was over. 28 lay dead in the mountain passes. Only Lord and one of his elite guards remained, backed against a cliff wall with nowhere to go. Walked toward them through the smoke and dust. She was covered in blood, some of it was green, some of it was red. She had taken wounds during the battle, her arm was burned, her leg was cut, but she was still standing, still moving, still coming. Lord raised his particle cannon. His hands were shaking. His yellow eyes were wide with something he had never felt before in his long life. "Fear. Stay back," he shouted. "I am Lord of the Empire. I have killed 1,000 creatures. I have conquered worlds. I will not be defeated by some primitive human animal." His guard stepped forward but was faster. Her knife flew from her hand and buried itself in the guard's eye. He collapsed without a sound. Now it was just her and Lord. "This is impossible," he hissed. "You are prey, you are weak. Your species is fragile, you have short lives, no claws, no armor, no weapons worth fearing. How is this possible?" Stopped a few feet away from him, she was breathing hard. Her body was screaming with pain, but her eyes were steady, her voice was calm. "You are right," she said. "We are all of those things." She took another step forward. "But we are also the species that hunted mammoths with sticks, that conquered every environment on our planet, that split the atom and walked on our moon. We are the species that looks at death and says, 'Not today.'" Lord raised his cannon and fired, but his hands were shaking too badly. The shot went wide, scorching the rock beside's head. She did not flinch. "You made a mistake," she said. "You thought because we are soft, we are weak, but softness is not weakness. The willow tree bends in the storm while the oak breaks. We bend, we adapt, we survive, and when we are pushed too far, we push back." Lord tried to fire again, but was already moving. She closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. Her hand grabbed his weapon and twisted it aside. Her knee drove into the gap in his armor at his waist. He doubled over with a grunt of pain. She pulled her knife from his dead guard's eye and held it to Lord's throat. "You wanted to hunt humans," she said. "Now you know what it feels like to be hunted." One quick motion, deep and precise. Lord fell at her feet, his yellow eyes still wide with disbelief. Stood over his body as the twin suns set behind the mountains. Around her, the surviving prisoners emerged from their hiding spots. 7 of them had entered this battle. 7 of them had survived. 30 hunters lay dead in the mountains. The hunt was over. And the hunters had lost. The broadcast had already begun before they could stop it. Lord had wanted the galaxy to watch. He had ordered recording drones to capture every moment of the final hunt. He wanted billions of beings across 1,000 worlds to see the human woman die screaming. He wanted them to remember the power of the Empire forever. But the drones recorded something very different. They recorded hunters falling one by one to traps and ambushes. They recorded Lord's elite guard being overwhelmed by creatures they had dismissed as weak and primitive. They recorded the great Lord himself backing against a wall with fear in his yellow eyes. And they recorded a small human woman, covered in blood and holding a simple metal blade, standing over his body in victory. The broadcast reached every corner of the Empire before anyone thought to shut it down. Billions of beings watched, some in disbelief, some in horror, and some, many more than they would ever admit, watched with hope burning in their hearts. On the slave world of Prime, where workers spent their lives in mines digging precious metals for ships, the broadcast played on screens in the common halls. The workers stopped their labor and stared. They saw the hunters fall. They saw the mighty Lord die with terror on his face. They saw that they could be beaten. On the prison moon of 7, where political enemies of the Empire were sent to be forgotten, inmates gathered around a single small screen. They watched in silence. When it was over, one of them began to cry, not from sadness, from joy, from the knowledge that somewhere out there someone had fought back and won. On 100 worlds, 1,000 worlds, the story spread, not just the broadcast but the meaning behind it. They were not gods. They were not invincible. They bled green just like everyone else. And they could be killed. On 4 knew none of this. She only knew that they needed to move quickly before reinforcements arrived. The battle had taken everything she had. Her body felt like it was made of broken glass. Every breath hurt. Every step sent fire through her wounded leg, but she could not stop. Not yet. "We need to find a ship," she said to the others. "Lord's shuttle, it should still be at the landing zone." Looked at her with concern in his large dark eyes. You need medical attention. We all do. We can rest when we are free. Move. They made their way down from the mountains as the 3 moons rose. The battlefield was quiet now except for the wind and the distant calls of strange birds. They passed bodies without looking at them. There was no time for anything but survival. Lord's shuttle was where he had left it, guarded by 2 crew members who had stayed behind. They were technicians, not fighters. When they saw the group of blood-soaked survivors approaching with weapons in their hands, they ran into the darkness without looking back. The shuttle was small, but it would hold them all. Was the only one with any knowledge of space travel. His old hands moved over the control panel, trying to remember lessons from decades ago. "I can fly it," he said finally, "but I do not know where to go. The Empire controls everything within 5 systems. They will hunt us wherever we flee." Leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She was so tired. Her last bullet was still in her pistol, unfired. She had not needed it. Part of her had known she was saving it for herself if everything failed. But everything had not failed. They were alive. They were free. "There are resistance groups," said quietly. His crystal body was cracked and dim, but his voice was steady. "I have heard rumors. Hidden places where people fight against the Empire. We could try to find them." "Rumors are not much to bet our lives on," Mora said. Her sister Lyra was leaning against her, exhausted beyond words. "Rumors are all we have," said. She opened her eyes and looked at each of them in turn. "But we have something else too. We have a story. What happened here, what we did, people will hear about it. People will know that they can be beaten." She stood up straight despite the pain screaming through her body. "Maybe we will die out there in the dark between stars. Maybe the Empire will catch us. But even if they do, the story will survive. And stories can change the galaxy." Activated the engines. The shuttle lifted off from the blood-soaked ground of 4 and rose through the orange clouds toward the stars. Behind them, the hunting moon grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Spent her last bullet on the shuttle's tracking system, destroying it with a single precise shot. The Empire would not be able to find them easily now. They drifted through space for 3 days before they found the first resistance contact, a small ship, barely bigger than their shuttle, hiding in the shadow of a dead moon. The people on board were suspicious at first. Then they heard the names. Lord, 4. The human woman who had turned the hunt into a massacre. They were welcomed like heroes. Over the following months, learned that the galaxy was larger and more complicated than she had ever imagined. There were resistance cells on dozens of worlds, secret networks of people who had been fighting the Empire in small ways for generations. They had been waiting for something, a spark, a sign that victory was possible. She gave them that sign. She traveled from world to world, always moving, never staying long. She taught what she knew, not just fighting, though she taught that too. She taught something more important. She taught them how to think like hunters instead of prey, how to use their weaknesses as strengths, how to turn the arrogance of the against them. Became her second in command. The frightened merchant who had once hidden and run learned to stand and fight, used his crystal eyes to gather information, building a network of spies across the Empire. Lyra and Mora trained underwater assault teams on a dozen water worlds, wrote books about psychology that became required reading for every resistance cell. Even the young human who had cried every night on 4 became a symbol of courage. If he could fight, anyone could. And the tall, furry being who never spoke followed everywhere like a shadow, protecting her from the many attempts on her life. They searched for her. They sent their best trackers, their most elite kill squads. They offered rewards that could buy planets, but had learned from the best hunters in the galaxy how to disappear. She was always one step ahead, always moving, always planning the next strike. Years passed. The resistance grew. Small victories became larger ones. Slave revolts on mining worlds, prison breaks on moon colonies, ambushes on patrol ships. Each success added fuel to the fire that had started. The Empire called her the human demon, the ghost of four, the monster who walks like prey. They made her a legend in their attempts to destroy her, and legends are impossible to kill. On the 10th anniversary of the massacre, the Great Uprising began. 100 species rose as one against their masters. They attacked on 1,000 fronts, in 1,000 ways, all coordinated through the network that and her allies had built over 10 years of patient work. The empire fell in 3 months. Historians would later argue about the causes: economics, politics, military mistakes, but those who had lived through it knew the truth. It all started on a hunting moon called Four. It all started with a woman who refused to be prey. Did not see the final victory. She disappeared 2 weeks before the empire collapsed, leaving only a message for and the others. The tiger is dead. You do not need me anymore. I am going home. Some say she found a way back to Earth. Some say she died in the final battles and her body was never found. Some say she is still out there somewhere, watching over the new free worlds, ready to fight again if she is ever needed. But everyone agrees on one thing. They armed her with bullets and a blade, weapons they thought were useless, weapons they gave her as a joke to make her death more entertaining. She turned the hunt into a massacre. She set the galaxy on fire. And nothing was ever the same again.